I'm now honored to invite our distinguished speaker, special guest, Peter Chandji. Deepaji, you would like to introduce?
Namaste, Peter Chand. Warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us all the way from UK. Delighted to have you here with us. So, a little introduction about Peter Chand. Peter Chand is an award winning international storyteller, constantly in demand for his unique retelling of tales from his motherland, India. He has shared his stories across Britain, and he has also performed in Norway, France, Croatia, Austria, Canada, and Singapore, amongst other countries. Peter grew up with Punjabi as his first language and still visits his family in Punjab to collect folk tales, which he translates and shares with keen listeners worldwide. As well as touring extensively, he has also shared his storytelling skills by leading workshops with teachers, librarians, budding storytellers, and anyone trying to find their voice and gain confidence in performing in the public. Whether it's performing to a tiny classroom or enthralling hundreds of adults in a theater, he has a story for every occasion. Peter is also part of the organizing team of the festival at the Edge, the oldest storytelling festival in England, which has a fine reputation for showcasing some of the best storytellers from around the world. Until summer 2021, Peter was also storyteller in residence at the Story Museum in Oxford and was recently recognized as one of the 100 masters for his contribution to storytelling and building community relations through the arts. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Deepa. Thank you very much. Can you hear me loud and clear? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Can I ask you guys to do me a favor, please? Can you, if you are able to and you are happy, please switch your cameras on so I can see your faces. I'm a storyteller. I like to see the people that I am talking to. I like to see the people that are listening, hopefully, as well. Brilliant. Human beings. This is what I've been waiting for. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's afternoon in India, I believe. So, like Deepa said, I am a storyteller. I have just celebrated my 17th year as a self-employed storyteller. So, as far as I know, I'm not 100% sure, but as far as I know, I think I'm the only storyteller of Indian origin in the UK who does this as a full-time job. And so I'm very proud of that fact. My family came from the Punjab area in the 1950s, and we weren't a middle class family. We were very much a working class family, you know, immigrants working hard. So as a result, we didn't have many books in our houses, but we had imagination. We learned how to fend for ourselves, and we learned how to pass the time and occupy ourselves. And that's why I think I love stories, you know. And also as well, I think it's why I also love folk stories. The great myths, with no disrespect to anybody, never sang to me. But the folk stories, the stories of the people, the folk stories that were from the ground, and the folk stories that were connected to sort of reality in a different way, have always appealed to me. Always, and I think they always will. And the folk stories are the stories that I still go back and collect now from my motherland, especially in the Punjab. And also, I also collect stories and read stories and translate stories, obviously, from Indian collections that were collected particularly by the British under the Raj. And those are really interesting stories as well, because those stories, and I'll be talking a little bit about context in a while, those stories, of course, were recorded in a completely foreign culture, were documented in a completely foreign culture, and then translated for a monotheistic um, culture thousands of miles away, and they were trying to shoehorn and sort of, it's like putting a square peg in a round hole. So those stories took on a different shape, took on a different meaning, took on a different, what I would say, flavor. So part of my job, I feel, as a storyteller, is to put the masala back in these stories, because the masala was taken out for obvious reasons, which I'm not an academic. You guys can figure that out yourself, for what reasons they were contextualized for a Western European audience. Um, and so part of the fun is, for example, is in a particular story, perhaps they will say something like, it'll be set in like Tales of the Punjab is a fine example by a lady called Flora Steele. Even the introduction has me in stitches, has me laughing my head off because her husband was a magistrate. So he is dispensing justice to the natives, and she is sitting under a tree collecting stories from the natives. And in one of the particular stories, she's talking about the good fairy, and I'm thinking, who is the good fairy? So she is translating these stories and contextualizing them for a Victorian audience, and who didn't know about the gods or the goddesses. So whether it was Lakshmi, whether it was Durga, whether it was Kali, whoever it was, has been turned into this conventional and convenient good fairy. Does that make sense? So part of the process as a storyteller, even when you're reading the story, is how do I interpret this? How do I go back to the masala of this story? And I'm very, very keen on this. I'm also very keen on the concept of who drives the narrative, whether that's in general life, whether that's in politics, whether that's in the media, but particularly in the context of storytelling, who drives the narrative? Who says which stories we are supposed to tell or are allowed to tell? So let me give you more of an example of this. I was talking to my partner. My partner's also a storyteller. She lives in Belgium. We were having a conversation last week, and I was saying, now in the West here in England, particularly, I'm talking about, say if you tell a story about a witch, yes, you tell a story about a witch. Now, already in a Western liberal context, that subject at this precise moment, for understandable reasons, is a very weighted motif or subject or area. Because straight away, now, in the context of the arts and the context of the liberal West, straight away you start thinking about oppression. Understandably, you start thinking about people who were mistreated, people who were wrongly accused, false accusations, misogyny, all those things, which I completely 100% get. I completely get this. But, however, the point is this: whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not, there are still millions of people around the world who still believe that there are witches, who still believe that there are demons, who still believe there are possessions. It might not sit well with our intellectual or progressive attitudes or a Western framework, but do we stop telling those stories? Do we ignore them completely? Are they be banned or cancelled? Is something that I consider every single day. And over the years as a storyteller, I've had to defend stories from my culture. And the point I'm trying to make is that it's very nice telling stories and saying, yes, we're communicating and we're building bridges. I get that. I understand the benefit of that. But then I also stand by, we all have our own truth as well that we have to fight for as well when we tell these stories, and we have to be bold when we tell these stories. And there's a very tendency in the West that I see in India as well, in the small sort of insights that I get of us becoming very cozy and becoming very self-satisfied in what it is as storytellers. What is our role as storytellers? You know, are we just are we just pushing the narrative that is the status quo, or are we questioning? Are we stimulating? Are we agitating? Because the folk stories have always done this. Just as all the folk arts have always done the same thing. They've always asked the questions. They've not just gone along with what is the status quo and what is perceived wisdom in the wider sort of kind of context, you know? So that's a little bit of the kind of background of where I'm from. I started off by, was forced to go to a storytelling club. We're very fortunate here. We used to have about 60 regular storytelling clubs in the UK, which run normally once a month, normally in a room above a pub. I was into poetry as a kid, I still am. I was into writing, creative thought, all those kind of things. I love narrative arts. And it took somebody 3 years to say, come to a storytelling club. I thought, what's the storytelling club? It's going to be people sitting in a chair reading a book. This is the perception that many people have of storytelling. For 3 years, this gentleman said, come, it'll be good. You love words. And so finally, he forced me to go. And I was thinking, what am I going to do? This is just not my thing at all. So finished my day's work. He took me into this countryside. I was in this pub in the middle of nowhere, lots of white people sitting in a circle with lots of beards and white hair. And I'm sitting there as they're drinking their ale, and somebody then kicks off by telling a story from Wales, a Welsh legend. And I was like, they're not reading, they've told this from memory. This is cool. And the next person said, well, I've just come to listen, I'm not telling. And the next person said, well, here's a Chinese story. And suddenly, within 10, 15 minutes, my brain, all the synapses were going like crazy. Images, dragons, characters. There was a familiarity with the narrative that suddenly I felt like I was awake. And I thought, this is something different. And from that, and in the end, when it came to me, I didn't plan to tell anything. I was there under duress. But I can't even remember what it was, but I know I just joined two 30-second funny lines or jokes. I can't remember what it was, to make a 1 minute story on the spot, because I wanted to be part of this, whatever this was, this collective thing, this excitement, this narrative, this story, this rhythm that I understood, that sang to me. And from that night, believe it or not, it was only 6 years later, from being introduced to storytelling, that I gave up a full-time job with, at that time, two young children, a family, to become a full-time storyteller. So I worked hard for 5 or 6 years around a full-time job, working 60 hours a week, and then learning my storytelling craft so I could become a storyteller. And it's taken me all around the world, I'm very happy to say, but it's also put me in contact with interesting people and interesting ideas. Um, and stories are the fiber of us, they're part of our DNA. You know, if you follow a religion, they're a set of stories. If you Who doesn't have a family member, that uncle or that auntie that nobody ever invites to the parties? Yes, I do. Every family has that. That's a story. When you, if you like, if like most of us, you have a mirror by your front door when you leave the house, and you look in the mirror before you leave for the day, and you go, or you go, ooh, that is a story that you tell yourself that carries you throughout that day. You know, and stories are powerful in so many ways, in the good stories we tell about people and the negative stories we tell about people. Stories are part of our DNA. We don't always see it as that, you know? Why are the stories around the world? Doesn't matter if it's an Indian or an African story or a Chinese story or a Grimm's Brothers story that they've collected, which incidentally, they weren't writers. People always mistake them for writers. They collected from peasants who have the best stories. Academics don't have the best stories, I'm sorry to say. Peasants have the best stories. And why are these stories from around the world? Doesn't matter where they come from. Why do they have a deep, dark forest? Does anybody know? Why do these stories always contain a deep, dark forest? Because a deep, dark forest is a metaphor for life. That's why. So if you are a child who has just finished primary school and you're going to secondary school, your first day, you were previously the biggest, the tallest of the children in small school. In big school now, you're the smallest. You look in the playground, there's all these loud children running around. You're thinking, oh my goodness me, I feel an insect amongst these loud grown-up children. That is a metaphor for a deep, dark forest. If you start a job and it's your first day in the office, everybody knows where the tea is, where the coffee is, what the conventions are, who is the joker in the pack, who's the serious person, who's the boss that nobody can laugh about. That is office politics. That is the deep dark forest. How am I ever going to fit into this rhythm? You know, um, and just like a deep dark forest, just like in life, a deep dark forest, you have encounters in life, obstacles in life. You need guidance. You need the wise person. You need your Gandalf. You need your Merlin. You need your wise woman of the woods to guide you along that path. At the end of the journey, there will be problems, there will be troubles, but hopefully you'll emerge at the end of the forest into some kind of sunlight, into some kind of resolution, into some kind of understanding. You might have lost people along the way, but hopefully at the end of that story, as you emerge from the deep, dark forest, something has been garnered, something is added to your understanding of the world. And this is why stories are important, and this is why the metaphor of stories is very important as well, I feel. So, so yes, when my mother passed away, my my brothers told me something. And he said, you know, when we were in India, because my family, like I said, comes from the Punjab. He says, when it used to be like the summertime, we used to sleep on the chawara, you know, the terrace. He says, and we used to have the munje out there on the terrace. He says, and all the children in the village used to come and lie on the munje, and mother used to be lying, looking up at the sky and looking up at the stars, and she would say, tell stories using the stars as illustrations to illustrate and to sort of pinpoint these stories. And he said we were mesmerized, and the children in the village would be mesmerized listening to her stories. I never knew this at all. I had no idea that this is what she used to do. So, in a way, going back to the motif of stories and DNA, I think that me being a storyteller was inevitable in one way or another. And storytelling is used in so many different contexts. You know, I work with organizations. I just recently done a big project with the NHS Leadership Academy here in the Southwest. Once again, using the metaphor of stories in a leadership context, and how the language of storytelling is part of our understanding of the world around us. You know, I'd like to sort of finish this part of the talk, if I may, because I think there's some time for questions. But um, when I do workshops, I often give the example of cave paintings. You know those cave paintings, those ancient cave paintings you see in France and parts of Spain. And I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of those cave paintings, but have you ever noticed this? Yeah, have you ever noticed that in those cave paintings that the um, the hunter the hunter is never running away from the herd. The hunter is never stampeded, and I'm sure that happened in reality. So you have this hunter comes back and he says, "Look, this was my day today. I was hunting these bison, and look how big the bison are. But look in this picture how big I am, and look how straight my back is." Because those hunters are never stooped over. Those hunters are never having any doubt, or they are heroic, you know, and they always look in scale much bigger than the bison or the buffalo that they are hunting. And like I said, you never ever see them running in the opposite direction. I'm sure that happened. I'm sure they got knocked down to the ground in reality. So as far as I'm aware, I think that's the first illustrated version of storytelling. Something that actually did happen that is enmeshed in truth, but has been embellished by the beauty of the imagination, by the beauty of storytelling, if that makes sense. So I have no notes today. I've not got any slides. I've not got any pictures. I've not got any PowerPoints to show you. I've just sort of talked a little bit about what came into my mind, and just like a story, it pops in and out of different scenarios and different motifs. But I hope there's some kind of insight into what it is that we do as storytellers, and the importance of why storytelling is relevant today. I would say arguably more than ever, when there is so much misinformation out there about others, about ourselves, about our perceptions, about the perfect image on social media that we try to portray of ourselves, of filters to make ourselves look beautiful and blemish free. Now is the time to tell stories honestly and openly, and also look at the underbelly. You have that expression in India, the underbelly of a story. You know, it's like it's the underbelly. So you see, say, a beautiful animal, you see a beautiful horse, you see its mane, you see its haunches, you see its beautiful face, its strong face. But the underbelly of the story is where the shadow is, where the shade is. That's another part of the story that is not obvious, and those in those dark places and in those crevices and those shadows, I believe, are where the most interesting stories lie. And those are the stories that I like to personally explore myself. Um, and like I said earlier, not follow the status quo in what we're supposed to tell and what we're supposed to contextualize, you know. And even the fact that this conference here indicates, fantastic that you guys are doing this. The fact that we are speaking and understanding and communicating in English would not happen if it was not for empire. So let's think about where these narratives are driving and who is driving the narrative, and who decides what story is to be told or is allowed to be told. Let's be bold as storytellers, or uh, practitioners in the folk arts, or academics. Let's not think in straight lines, because life is never in straight lines. Stories are never in straight lines. it's in circles. So I think that's about my time as far as I can tell. So if there's any questions, please feel free to pop them in. I'll put my spectacles on because I'm a man of certain ages, so I can see you a bit more clearly. Okay, so I've got an anonymous attendee saying, life of storytelling in the UK, amazing. Which book in English of Indian stories do you suggest me to start? I would say A.K. Ramunajan's Folk Tales of India is the book that I use the most, because not only does he has he collected amazing stories, but he also in his notes are some of the best notes that I've ever seen in any storybook. So Folk Tales of India, A.K. Ramunajan.
Ram,
Uh, that's a fantastic book. Uh, how do you handle the contrasting narratives of the West about East? Do you tell them the native perspective? Well, see, this is the interesting thing: is that is even though I'm obviously Indian, my mother and father are Indian. I was still brought up in Britain. I was raised in Britain through the British education system. So a lot of the times, like I said earlier, it's which I think kind of relates to this question, is that I'm constantly fighting for my stories, you know? So I'll give you a very quick example of this if this makes sense. And this is what I'm talking about, being bold and being truthful to your own truth and being willing to sort of stand for what the story stands for and what you believe the truth in that story is. So recently I was doing a story, I think it's a Bengali story, and in that one story, I've told it 1,000 times. It's a beautiful story about understanding and about the capacity to listen to each other. What happens, the powerful exchange of listening and really understanding each other. And that's the essence of this story. But there's a part in that story where I was saying this daughter-in-law is mistreated. So I'd say, like, when she's stirring the dal, the sasoji is saying, is this how you, don't you know, we don't stir the dal like this. When she's washing her husband's shirts, the Sasoji is saying, we wash the collars first, we don't wash the cuffs, and all this. And this one particular lady took offense of the character washing she says, I didn't like that she was washing her husband's shirts. And I thought, so strange that this is the thing that you've picked up from this whole story, which is about the power of listening and understanding. That's like the old Bruce Lee quote where he says, when you're looking at the moon, is the idiot looks at the finger and not the moon, and that's the first thing. And secondly, I said, but I give my audience, I invest with them the intelligence that they know that this is an old story, you know, and secondly, that it's from a culture that you might not agree with. This might not be your concept of what a woman, it's not acceptable for you. It might be that a woman should not wash her husband's shirts. But I hate to tell you this, there are millions of people around the world that is their norm. You have the freedom, the liberty, the circumstance, the privilege to be able to say that is not my way of living. But millions don't, billions don't. And once again, it's that arrogance of saying my truth is the only truth, is I find very, very disturbing. So the question of how do I tell it in a native context? How native am I? I know my Punjabi background. I know who I am. That's one thing I've had no conflict with. I know my family's history. I know the freedom struggle the independent struggles that my parents were involved in. I grew up, like I said, not surrounded by books, but having calendars on the walls of my parents' business of people like Bhagat Singh and freedom fighters like this. They were my heroes. So I know about my culture, and we need to know about our history and our stories, but we also need to be bold to be able to stand up for them and defend them as well. Because constantly in this world, we are being told there's a single narrative. It's black or white. That's why everything is so polarized. You're either right or you're wrong. And if you have a different opinion to me, you are my enemy. Geez, where did this come from? When did our thinking become so narrow and so restrictive You know, India, if anything, is one thing has always been pluralistic in its thoughts and its ideas, you know, has always been here's a multitude of attitudes, here's a multitude of ideas. Why were the Greeks visiting India, you know, 300, 400 years BC and beyond, you know, and even beyond that? Because the exchanges of ideas were open to interpretation, were open to discourse. And once we lose discourse, and the ability to listen to each other's stories without saying, okay, well, you know, that's no, I don't agree with that story. So that story, therefore, is taboo. We're on dangerous ground. We're on very dangerous ground. So I hope that kind of answers in a very long storyteller's response to that question. I think, Deepa, are we done for time? I'm sorry, I've lost a bit of track now. So let's have a look.
Shiv Kumar ji will be able to tell us.
Yeah, another 3-4 minutes.
Emotions play a very important role. How to put emotions into stories. Yeah, so you don't. Thank you very much for that as well. Is it Sugandhi Sarath? Yeah. Let me do one thing. Let me type in this title of this book, so everybody has that. Is that okay? Yes. That probably would be everyone. So it's okay. I think I've spelt the surname right, but you will find it under this Folk Tales of India, A.K. Ramanujan. I think that's how you spell it. Excuse me if it's a misspelling, but
It is
this
A.K. Ramanujan.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. I think I'll put an extra couple of letters in there. But this book, I have many books, of course I do. But that book
It's a
is,
beautiful book. It's a beautiful
yeah,
book.
it's the one that it's my go back to book every time. It's the book that sort of always provides a story for me when I'm looking for a particular kind of story. I forgot to say as well, I also collect stories from India as well, from family. And those are the best stories because the stories I collect from a particular cousin's wife in Hoshiarpur. She's amazing. She's in her 70s now, does not speak, does not read or write. She's illiterate, but my goodness me, she's, with due respect to all the storytellers I've met, she's the best storyteller I know, you know? And she knows these stories that have been passed from generation to generation to generation. And it's so exciting because not only is it the stories that are beautiful, but I can ask her, why did they do this? Unlike a book, and she'll say, well, in those days, that in those days the tradition was so and that's why they do this. So I have an encyclopedia there in front of me that actually is the notes in a voice, in a human person, you know, telling me the notes and the questions to those stories, and the expressions. You know, there's an expression that I've tried. I'm articulate. I can speak. You know, I can express myself. But there's an expression that she said in a story once that I've not got the same power in English as there is in Punjabi. And she's talking about a couple who have no children. And they've been trying to have children for ages. And she says this expression that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੰਗਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੰਦ ਕੱਸ ਗਏ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੰਗਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੰਦ ਕੱਸ ਗਏ ਸੀ from begging and begging and begging their teeth ground down. Isn't that a beautiful expression? And I've never got the same pataka, the same power with it in English, you know, because normally people would say, like, you know, they begged so much their tongue was worn out, but this was even more begging because their teeth actually ground down. And it's little expressions or turns of phrases like that that people don't use anymore, that it's really important to keep alive in these stories as well. So yeah, I'm very lucky that I have this amazing storyteller. Last time I went there, she said, you know these stories that you tell? I says, yes. She said, you get money for them, don't you? I said, yes, Paviji, I do. I get money for them. She says, So now when I go and see them, and I will see them when lockdown is over, I obviously she's my elder, so she would not take money for me directly for the stories, but you know, I just say, here, buy yourself something nice. So in a way, yeah, she's an enterprising Indian woman there, right there in front of you. So thank you ever so much for all your time. And good luck with the rest of this conference. And I hope I see you somewhere down the road, hopefully. And yeah, good luck with happy storytelling, and take care of yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter G. So two things struck me. One is your reference to A.K. Ramanujan, the author. He's a celebrated author. He was in University of Chicago in the South Asian department, and he's from my state, Karnataka. He's from Mysore, and he was a bilingual writer. He could write in Kannada and in English, and is a very important influence both in academics and in the folk traditions. The other thing I'm very happy is that the influence of your aunt in Hoshiarpur, I think, that it is that, our striving for the flow of the past into the future. I think that's an important aspect of storytelling itself, actually. So that is
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, very much so.
Thanks, Deepaji.
Thank you, Peter. I did want to mention. Okay.
Sorry, I'm here. Sorry.
Yeah, I did want to mention that three things that certainly stayed. One was about acknowledging the multiplicity of stories and multiplicity of realities. And then, of course, not fearing to share yours, whatever is yours. And lastly, I still remember the twinkle in your eye with which you would talk about. I go back to Punjab, we're having those discussions in Scotland at the Scottish Storytelling Festival. And to be reminded of that enthusiasm, that it's only when we know what's really there that we can have. I think the lack of fear comes from knowing also. So that was a lovely reminder, hearing your story. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you.